He said it out loud. Right there in front of 20 people, in a boardroom that cost more to furnish than most people earn in a decade, with the rain hammering the windows, and every executive in the room pretending they hadn't heard him. Kwon Si-hyuk didn't whisper it. He didn't imply it. He looked directly at Zuri Adebayo, 27 years old, first day, folder pressed against her chest, and said, with the kind of flat certainty that only comes from a man who has never once been told he was wrong, "I don't work with women like her. Send her back. Not her credentials, not her experience, her." The room went so quiet you could hear the rain, and Zuri, who had survived worse rooms than this, who had crossed an ocean for this job, whose 17-year-old brother was lying in a hospital bed right now, waiting for a surgery their family could not afford, Zuri stood completely still and felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear, not tears. Rage. Clean, focused, absolute rage. If you've ever been dismissed before you were given a single chance to prove yourself, if you've ever walked into a room and felt the air change before you opened your mouth, then you already know exactly what was moving through her body in that moment. What she did next changed both their lives. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been watching for a while, you already know what kind of stories we tell on this channel. Stories about people who were counted out. Stories that don't let you go. Subscribe if you haven't already, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now, let's get into it, from the beginning. Zuri Adebayo had not planned to be nervous. She had rehearsed the walk from the elevator to the boardroom in her head on the flight from Lagos. She had ironed her blouse twice in the hotel room that morning. She had arrived at Cheonhua International 40 minutes early, introduced herself to the front desk with a smile that cost her considerable effort, and had been escorted to the 48th floor by a young assistant who spoke very little English and seemed genuinely uncertain whether Zuri was supposed to be there at all. She told herself this was fine. First days were always like this. Then the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and the sheer scale of the place hit her. All black marble and floor-to-ceiling glass, the whole city of Busan laid out below like something from a film, rain driving hard against the windows, and Zuri's heel caught on the edge of the elevator threshold. She didn't fall. She caught herself with one hand on the doorframe, recovered her balance, straightened up, and kept walking like it hadn't happened. The assistant who was escorting her politely pretended not to notice. It was the first of what would turn out to be many recoveries. The boardroom was already full when she arrived. 20 executives, give or take. All of them in dark suits, most of them Korean, several of them significantly older than the man sitting at the head of the table. That man was Kwon Si-hyuk, and Zuri recognized him immediately from the company briefing materials she'd spent the past week memorizing. 31 years old, youngest CEO in Cheonhua International's history, controlled somewhere between 40 and 60% of Busan's commercial port operations, depending on which financial report you believed and which one you suspected had been edited. Meticulous, cold, rarely smiled in photographs, never explained his decisions to anyone. It was also, Zuri noted with a kind of detached professionalism, extremely difficult to read. Most people gave you something in the first few seconds. A flicker of curiosity, the particular tension of someone trying to look unimpressed. Si-hyuk gave her absolutely nothing. He looked at her the way someone might look at a document that had been placed in front of him without explanation. The assistant introduced her. Executive Secretary, new assignment, here are her credentials. Si-hyuk looked at the folder of credentials and did not open it. Then he looked at Zuri, and the temperature in the room dropped by several degrees. "Send her back," he said. The assistant blinked. "Sir?" "I said send her back." His voice was entirely level. No anger in it, no particular heat, just the complete absence of negotiation. "I don't work with women like her." 20 people did not breathe. Zuri felt the folder in her hands go very still. Some part of her brain, the careful professional part, was already making calculations. The exit, the elevator, the script she could hand herself for the phone call back to the agency. Another part of her, older and less polished, was doing something entirely different. It was counting. 1, 2. She had crossed 6,000 miles for this position. She had passed 4 rounds of interviews, 2 skills assessments, 1 background check, and a panel review conducted via video call at 2 in the morning, her time, because that was when it fit the company's schedule. She had done all of that in the months since Toby's diagnosis came through, since the doctor had sat their family down and used the phrase kidney failure, and her mother had gone very quiet, and Zuri had done the math in her head on what treatment actually cost and understood, cleanly and without drama, that she was now the plan. She had not told any of that to the hiring committee. She had not told anyone, because Zuri Adebayo did not walk into a room leading with what she needed. She walked in leading with what she could do. 3. She looked at Si-hyuk. His expression had not changed. He was waiting for her to gather her things and leave, she realized. He genuinely expected that she would simply collect herself and go, because that was the most efficient outcome, and he was a man who valued efficiency. "If my work is unacceptable," Zuri said, "fire me." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which surprised her. Si-hyuk's eyes sharpened slightly, just slightly. "But if the problem is my skin," she said, "then that's not a work problem. That belongs to you." Nobody moved. One of the senior executives, a man in his 60s with silver hair, had the look of someone watching a small animal walk deliberately toward a much larger one. Another had his hand pressed flat against the table as though physically anchoring himself. Si-hyuk studied her for a long moment with that same unreadable expression. Then he said, 30 days. Zuri blinked. "Excuse me?" "You have 30 days to prove your work is worth keeping." He turned back to the table as though she had already ceased to interest him. "If it isn't, we'll revisit the conversation you just started." The meeting resumed around her as though someone had simply pressed play on a paused recording. Someone pulled out a chair for her at the far end of the table. Whether out of courtesy or to position her as far from Si-hyuk as possible, she couldn't tell. And Zuri sat down, opened her folder, clicked her pen, and spent the next 45 minutes taking meticulous notes while her hands shook slightly under the table where nobody could see them. She caught her folder on the edge of the table when she stood to leave. 3 pens rolled to the floor. She picked them up without comment and walked out. The first 2 weeks were designed to break her. Zuri understood this rationally, even as she was living through it. The assignments that appeared in her inbox at 6 in the morning. The contracts, hundreds of pages each, that needed summaries by noon. The financial records from 3 separate fiscal years that required cross-referencing against current accounts. The scheduling demands that overlapped deliberately, requiring her to be in 2 places at once, presenting her with problems that had no clean solution. She worked through most of it. Some of it she worked through twice because her first attempt had a small error that she caught herself before it reached anyone else's desk. Around the office, she remained exactly who she was in public. Organized chaos contained inside a professional exterior. She misjudged doorways. She walked into glass panels while reviewing documents. Once, carrying a stack of folders to Si-hyuk's office, she caught her heel on a carpet seam, performed what could only be described as a controlled stumble that spanned approximately 8 feet of hallway, and arrived at his desk with every folder intact and her expression entirely neutral. Si-hyuk looked up from his computer. Zuri set the folders down. The Hansuk contract summaries, the Port Authority correspondence from 2019 through last quarter, and the executive compensation review you requested. She paused. There's a discrepancy in the 2021 figures on page 47 of the compensation file. Someone moved about 14 million won from the development budget into a subsidiary account. I flagged it. Si-hyuk looked at the folders, then at her, then back at his screen. Green. Leave them, he said. She left them. An hour later, his assistant quietly confirmed that the discrepancy Zuri had noted had been sitting undetected for 11 months. Nobody told her this. She found out when one of the other secretaries, a woman named Park Ji-yeon, who had been quietly, cautiously kind to Zuri from the first week, mentioned it in passing while they were eating lunch in the break room. He reviewed the file himself, Ji-yeon said carefully, in the measured English she used when she wanted to make sure Zuri understood her. It was a real error. Zuri chewed her rice and nodded. He didn't say anything? He said leave them. Ji-yeon looked at her for a moment, then quietly went back to her food. But there was something in her expression, not quite surprise, but a recalibration of something she had assumed. Zuri was used to that look. She had been collecting it for 2 weeks. The water bottle happened on a Thursday. Zuri had developed a habit of straightening things that looked wrong, not out of obsession, but out of the same instinct that made her catch spreadsheet errors, a sense that something slightly off deserved a second look. She had reorganized the executive floor's filing system in her second week, rearranged the supply inventory, and quietly corrected 3 mislabeled archive boxes before anyone noticed they needed correcting. That Thursday morning, she was setting up the private conference room for Si-hyuk's 8 o'clock meeting when she noticed his bottled water. Specifically, she noticed the seal. It was slightly crooked. Not dramatically. You'd miss it in a hurry. But the tamper seal on the cap wasn't sitting flush the way it should, and there was a faint mark on the plastic just below where the cap met the bottle, a thin line that didn't match the manufacturer's standard impression. She replaced the bottle with one from the sealed case in the supply room. She did it the way she did most things, without drama, without mentioning it to anyone, because as far as she knew, she was just fixing a presentation detail. A crooked seal looked sloppy, and sloppy things reflected on her work. She learned later, much later, that the water had been tampered with. She didn't know that Thursday morning. She found out on a rainy Friday 3 weeks after it happened, when Ji-yeon came to her desk with the look of someone carrying something they didn't know how to set down. "Something was in his water," Ji-yeon said quietly. "The bottle you replaced." Zuri looked at her. "What?" "Security tested it. After the gala shooting, they went back through everything." Ji-yeon glanced at the door, then back at Zuri. "They think someone inside the building put something in it." Zuri sat with that for a moment. "I thought the cap looked crooked," she said finally. Ji-yeon stared at her. "I thought it looked unprofessional," Zuri said, "for a presentation." The silence between them stretched out long enough to become uncomfortable. "What?" The elevator happened the following week. Zuri had been reconciling the maintenance records for the building's service contracts, which was exactly as tedious as it sounded, and also exactly the kind of detail work she was genuinely good at. Not because she loved it, but because her brain had a particular intolerance for numbers that didn't fit where they were supposed to fit. The private elevator for the executive floor had a maintenance record showing 2 service visits in the past quarter. The contractor's invoice, which she found in a separate file, showed payment for 3. The 3rd visit had no corresponding entry in the building's security log. No badge access. No sign-in. She flagged it to building management as a billing discrepancy. She assumed someone had submitted a duplicate invoice. Security pulled the elevator out of service and discovered that something had been done to the braking system. She learned this the same way she learned most things about Si-hyuk's survival, secondhand, in pieces, much later than it happened. By the time Zuri understood what she had been stumbling through, what she had been preventing without knowing she was preventing it, the 30 days were almost up. On the 28th day, Si-hyuk called her into his office and closed the door. This was unusual. In 4 weeks, every conversation they'd had been in open spaces, boardrooms, hallways, the edge of his desk with the door ajar and his assistant visible through the glass. He had never closed the door. Zuri stood in front of his desk and waited. He looked at her for a long moment with that expression she still hadn't learned to read, the one that gave her nothing. And then he said, "Your 30 days are up Friday. I'm aware." "The accounting discrepancy you flagged in the first week." He paused. "That was 11 months old." "Yes." "Nobody caught it." "No." Si-hyuk leaned back slightly. "Why did you catch it?" Zuri considered the question. "Because 14 million won moved, and nobody explained where it went. Numbers don't move by accident." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had started again. A lighter rain this time, more mist than storm. "You have a gift for finding things that don't belong," he said. Not as a compliment exactly, more as an observation someone makes when they are still working out what it means. Zuri said, "I also have a gift for walking into glass doors. I try not to lead with that one." Something moved across Si-hyuk's face. It was very fast, and she wasn't entirely certain she'd seen it, but it looked, briefly, unexpectedly, like the beginning of a smile. "You're staying," he said. Not an offer, a statement. Zuri looked at him. "That's my decision." The not-quite smile again. "It is," he said. "Are you making it?" She thought about Toby, about the surgery costs she had taped to the inside of her work bag and looked at every morning on the bus, about the phone calls home every Sunday that she kept deliberately cheerful even when her voice wanted to do something else. "Yes," she said. "I'm staying." Si-hyuk turned back to his desk, reached for the nearest file and said, There's a Port Authority review Monday. I need the 2022 and 2023 contract files cross-referenced before 9. Zuri took out her notebook. I'll have them by 8. She walked to the door, misjudged the handle slightly, caught herself, and left. Behind her, alone in the office, Kwon Si-hyuk sat with a folder open in front of him that he did not read for several minutes. He was trying to remember the last time anyone had told him that something was his problem. He was trying to remember the last time someone had stayed. The Port Authority files were on Si-hyuk's desk by 7:53 Monday morning. Zuri had come in early enough that the building's cleaning crew was still finishing the executive floor, the vacuum running in long, slow strips down the hallway carpet, while she sat at her workstation with 2 files open side by side and a cold cup of coffee she kept forgetting to drink. She had been there since 6:30. She had not slept particularly well, which was not unusual. Sleep had been a negotiation since Toby's diagnosis, something she bargained with rather than simply had, but she had been functional, which was what mattered. She finished the cross-reference, flagged 2 minor inconsistencies in the 2023 contract renewal terms, printed the summary, paper-clipped it to the front of the file with a handwritten note that said, "See pages 34 and 67. Renewal clause language differs from 2022 precedent, may require legal review, and set the whole thing on Si-hyuk's desk at 7:53 exactly." He arrived at 8:02. He picked up the file, read the note, set it back down without comment. Zuri, from her workstation in the adjoining office, watched him through the glass partition and felt the particular low-grade exhaustion of a person who has long since stopped expecting acknowledgement and has recalibrated to simply needing the work to be right. She turned back to her screen. At 8:09, Si-hyuk's intercom clicked on. "Call legal. Tell them to pull the 2022 and 2023 Port Authority contracts and hold a review meeting before the authority presentation Thursday." "Yes, sir." "And Adebayo." She paused. He almost never used her name. "The note on the clip, that's how it should be done." The intercom clicked off. Zuri stared at her screen for a moment. Then she picked up the phone and called legal. The thing about Cheonhua International's executive floor was that it looked like a place where everything worked smoothly. The marble, the glass, the particular quality of silence that expensive carpet creates, all of it communicated an institution that had solved the problem of disorder. What it actually was, as Zuri was learning in layers, was a place full of people who had spent years managing what Si-hyuk saw and didn't see, adjusting what reached him and what didn't, making small calculations every day about information and access and proximity to the man who controlled everything on that floor. She noticed it the way she noticed crooked seals and mismatched invoices. Not all at once. In accumulation. Deputy Director Lim Sung-cheol noticed her noticing. He was 53, had been at Cheonhua for 19 years, and had occupied the role of Si-hyuk's informal gatekeeper for most of that time. The man who decided which problems were worth escalating, which subordinates deserved face time, which information got filtered before it reached the 48th floor. He wore that authority the way some men wear expensive watches, not ostentatiously, but with a settled certainty that it was his and had always been his. Zuri crossed him for the first time in her 5th week, by accident. She had been passing a message from the legal department directly to Si-hyuk, a time-sensitive question about the Port Authority contract language that needed an answer before noon, because the legal team had called her directly, and she had simply walked it to Si-hyuk's door without going through Lim's office first. She didn't know that was wrong. Nobody had told her the routing. What she knew was that she had passed Si-hyuk the message at 11:40, and he had given her an answer by 11:50, and she had relayed it back to legal in time for them to finalize the document before the presentation deadline. She found out it was wrong when Lim appeared at her workstation at 12:15, closed her office door without asking, and stood on the other side of her desk with an expression she could only describe as controlled. "Message routing for Director Kwon goes through my office," he said. "Every communication, all departments." Zuri looked at him. "The legal team needed an answer in under an hour. I didn't know the routing. Now you know." "I'll use it for non-urgent communications," she said. "If a deadline is all communications." His voice didn't rise, but it also didn't leave room. "This isn't a suggestion." She held his gaze. There was a particular kind of authority that men like Lim exercised. Not loud, not threatening in any obvious way, but built from years of everyone around them accepting it without question. She had met it before in other forms. "I understand," she said. He nodded once and left. Zuri turned back to her screen. Her jaw was tight in a way she consciously released, muscle by muscle. She routed the next 3 non-urgent messages through Lim's office. She kept a log of which ones arrived to Si-hyuk on time and which ones arrived late. Si-hyuk did not miss the pattern. That was the thing about him that continued to surprise her. He was more observant than he appeared, and he appeared extremely observant. He said almost nothing about what he noticed, filed it somewhere behind those still dark eyes, and then occasionally referenced something she had assumed he hadn't registered at all. 6 weeks in, he called her into a working session on a Wednesday evening. Not a meeting, just the two of them at the long side table in his office with project files spread between them, going through the quarter's operational costs in preparation for a board presentation. His assistant had gone home. The floor was mostly empty. The rain was back. It seemed to rain constantly in Busan, Zuri had decided, a city that had made its peace with being permanently damp. And the window beside them was a long dark mirror streaked with water, the city lights below blurred and soft. They worked in near silence for almost an hour. Si-hyuk had a particular quality of stillness when he was focused. No fidgeting, no small sounds, just complete concentration directed at whatever was in front of him. Zuri had learned to read his silences by their texture, which was an odd skill she hadn't expected to develop. There was the silence that meant he was processing, the silence that meant he had found something wrong, the silence that meant he was waiting for her to catch up to something he'd already seen. This was a working silence, comfortable almost. She was cross-checking 2 subsidiary reports when she found it. Not an error exactly. A pattern. Payments to a contractor called Sangmo Consulting, quarterly, consistent, substantial, clean documentation, proper invoicing, all the correct paperwork. But when she pulled the subsidiary's actual operational records, there was no corresponding work, no deliverables documented, no project files, just payments, received, signed off, closed. She sat with it for a moment. Then she said, without looking up, "What is Sangmo Consulting?" Si-hyuk's pen stopped moving. She looked up then, because the quality of the silence changed. He was looking at the file in front of her. His expression had done something she hadn't seen before. Not closed down exactly, but shifted, the way a door shifts when someone puts a hand against it from the other side. "Where did you find that?" he said. "The Daesong subsidiary operational costs, quarterly payments, consistent over 4 years, but I can't find any corresponding deliverables in the project files." Si-hyuk was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Leave that file with me," he said. His voice was still even, but it was a different kind of even than usual. Not the flat absence of emotion she'd learned to read as his default, but something more deliberate. The evenness of a man choosing it. Zuri set the file on his side of the table and went back to the report in front of her. She did not ask. She had learned, slowly and empirically, the difference between questions Si-hyuk would answer and questions he would simply absorb and not respond to. And she had also learned, more slowly, with more difficulty, that some information was information she was not yet supposed to have. She finished her section of the cost review. She asked 2 clarifying questions about board presentation formatting. She collected her notes, said goodnight, and left. In the elevator down, alone, she allowed herself to feel the thing she'd been holding at arm's length during the whole session. Whatever Sangmo Consulting was, Si-hyuk knew the name. He had recognized it immediately and said nothing informative, which meant it was either something he was already investigating or something he was protecting. Either possibility was a problem. She pressed the lobby button and watched the numbers count down and told herself it wasn't her concern. She was his secretary. She found discrepancies. She reported them. The rest of it was above her floor. She almost believed it. The sniper event happened on a Thursday. Zuri didn't know it was a sniper event. At the time, what she knew was that Si-hyuk had an investor presentation at 2 o'clock in the 3rd floor conference room that faced the main avenue, and that he had forgotten to sign the charitable fund transfer for a children's hospital foundation that the company had committed to publicly and which was supposed to be filed before the close of business that day. She found the unsigned transfer on her desk at 1:47. She picked it up, checked the timestamp on the filing deadline, 4 o'clock, which left room, but not enormous room, and made a decision. She could send it through the inner office system and hope it reached him before he went into the presentation. Or she could bring it herself because she knew exactly where he was going to be in the next 4 minutes, and she could intercept him in the hallway, get a 30-second signature, and have the document back at her desk and filed by 2:15. She took the second option because it was faster and she needed it done. She was moving down the corridor toward the presentation suite when she spotted Si-hyuk near the end of the hall, and also spotted a full catering cart that had been positioned, inexplicably, directly in her path, and which she navigated around in a wide arc that took her closer to the wall and further from the large window at the end of the corridor. She called out to him. He turned. She held up the document. "The hospital transfer," she said, slightly breathless from the pace she'd been walking. "It's due by 4. I need 30 seconds. He walked toward her rather than waiting. They were both standing close to the wall, away from the window, she realized later, because she'd steered them there automatically while managing the catering cart. He signed. She collected the pen. She was already turning back toward her workstation. "Adebayo." She stopped. "Good catch," he said. She nodded once and went back down the hall. She heard about the rest of it 4 days later from Ji Yeon, who had heard it from building security, who were not supposed to be telling anyone but couldn't help themselves. "A scope," Ji Yeon said very quietly in the break room. "From the building across the avenue. They think he was positioned there for almost an hour." Zuri's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "The window at the end of the corridor," Ji Yeon continued. "If Si-hyuk had stood there for another 30 seconds, he didn't," Zuri said, "because you made him walk toward you." She set the coffee down. Her hand was steady, which she appreciated because inside something was doing something loud and disorganized that she did not have a name for yet. "I needed a signature," she said. Ji Yeon looked at her for a long moment with an expression Zuri couldn't entirely decode. "3 times," Ji Yeon said softly. "What?" "The water, the elevator, now this." She paused. "3 times you've been between him and something terrible, and you didn't know it." Zuri stared at the table. She thought about the water bottle with the crooked seal, the elevator with the mismatched invoice, the unsigned form on her desk at 1:47. She thought about the word 3. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she said, "Someone is trying to kill him." Ji Yeon said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She did not sleep that night, not even the negotiated, fragmented version she'd been getting since Toby's diagnosis. She lay in her apartment, small, functional, chosen because it was 20 minutes from the office and had reliable hot water, and stared at the ceiling and thought about the shape of things, the pattern of it. Not accidents, not coincidence. Someone inside the building with access to the water supply, the maintenance contracts, the investor schedule. Someone who knew where Si-hyuk would be. She thought about Lim Song-cheol and his careful, settled authority over what information reached Si-hyuk and when. She told herself she was a secretary. She found numbers that didn't add up. She typed correspondence and managed scheduling and occasionally prevented herself from tripping over her own feet in front of 20 executives. She told herself this was not her problem. She told herself that so many times that she was still awake at 3 in the morning, which she took as evidence that she didn't believe it. In the second month, the executives started talking. Zuri had expected this. She had experienced versions of it before. In university, in her first corporate position in Lagos, in the brief disastrous 6 months she had spent at a London consulting firm where she had been the only black woman on an entire floor and had learned to identify the exact tone of voice people used when they were technically including you while actually discussing whether you belonged. The Chianhua version had its own particular flavor. It started as looks, the kind you catch at the edge of your vision, a glance exchanged across a conference table, held a half-second too long. Then it became the particular silence that falls in a room when you enter and continues just slightly too long before the normal sounds resume. Then it became words, which is always when looks and silences become a problem. The word that circulated, she pieced together through Ji Yeon's careful, reluctant summaries, was arrangement, as in, she must have some kind of arrangement, as in, a plus-size foreign secretary who survived 30 days with Kwon Si-hyuk, who was allowed in working sessions that lasted past 8 at night, who had somehow accumulated a position that looked, to people who didn't understand competence, and had never needed to, like something other than competence. She overheard part of it herself, rounding a corner in the executive washroom corridor on a Tuesday afternoon. Two male executives from the floor below, not bothering to lower their voices because they had not yet learned to account for where she might be. Lasted 2 months, which tells you everything. Si-hyuk doesn't keep secretaries, he doesn't... She stopped walking.
Exactly subtle about it is she, the way she rounded the corner. Both men saw.
The sentence stopped midair, sitting between them like something dropped. Zuri looked at them. She said nothing, which was more effective than anything she could have said, and walked past them to her destination. She did not allow herself to react until she was in a stairwell with the door closed, and then she allowed herself approximately 45 seconds of very quiet, very focused anger, the kind that sits in your chest and makes your breathing go shallow, and then she collected herself, smoothed her jacket, and went back to work. She thought about it all afternoon. Not the men. They were background noise, the kind of noise that existed everywhere and would exist everywhere and could not be allowed to become the story. What she thought about was the thing underneath their words. Zuri was smart enough to know that the rumors were a weapon. She just didn't know yet whose hand it was in. The resignation happened on a Friday. It was not planned. That was the thing she would think about later. She had not walked in that morning with a decision made. She had walked in with her coat and her bag and her cold coffee from the cart on the ground floor, and she had sat down and opened her schedule and started working. And then her workstation phone rang at 9:15, and it was a reporter from a business publication, and the reporter asked her, in a voice carefully pitched to sound conversational, whether she could comment on the nature of her personal relationship with Director Kwon. She hung up. She sat for exactly 2 minutes, then she wrote the resignation letter, printed it, and walked it to Si-hyuk's office. He read it. He set it on the desk. He looked at her with that expression she had spent 2 months trying to decode, and she still couldn't entirely, but something in it was different today. Not closed down, not calculating, something she didn't have a precise word for. "No," he said. Zuri looked at him. "That's not your decision. Someone inside this building fed your name to that reporter." His voice was quiet. "Exact. Whoever they are, they're counting on you to leave. That's not a reason for me to stay. It's a reason to understand who benefits from your absence." She felt the logic of that land. She didn't want to feel it because she was angry and exhausted, and her brother's next lab results were coming in 2 days, and she was holding approximately 4 times as much as any person should be asked to hold at once. And the idea of staying inside this building with people who were painting her as something she wasn't was almost physically painful. "I will not remain because you order me to," she said. "Not again. If I stay, it's my choice." "Then make your choice," he said. "But don't let them make it for you." She stood in his office for a moment that stretched into something longer than it should have. Then she went back to her desk. She did not formally withdraw the resignation. She simply returned to her workstation and reopened her files and kept working. And Si-hyuk did not mention the letter again, and by the end of the day it seemed to have been resolved by mutual, unspoken agreement that it had not quite happened. But something else had. In Si-hyuk's office, alone, she had looked at him across the desk and felt for the first time that she was looking at a person rather than a problem. A man with something very complicated happening behind those still dark eyes. A man who had just told her, in the most compressed and practical terms, that he did not want her gone. Not because she was useful, though she was, but for a reason that neither of them was ready to name yet. She filed that information somewhere careful, the way she filed everything that she wasn't sure what to do with yet, and went back to work. Outside the window, Busan glittered in the early evening light. And somewhere in the building below her, the person who had called that reporter was watching her workstation light stay on and making a calculation about what to do next. The workstation light stayed on until 10:47 that Friday night. Zuri knew because she was the one sitting behind it, and she watched the city below go through its evening changes, the shift traffic, the restaurant crowds, the particular thinning that happened around 9 when Busan's business district exhaled and became something quieter, while she worked through the thing that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the reporter called that morning. Someone fed her name to the press. Someone inside the building. She had been turning this over for hours, the way she turned over numbers that didn't reconcile, patiently, methodically, without forcing a conclusion before the evidence was ready to support one. She had the maintenance invoices. She had the Sangmo consulting payments, which Si-hyuk had pulled from her hands and said nothing more about. She had the water bottle, the elevator, the sniper's scope. And now she had a reporter calling her workstation directly, which required knowing her extension, which was internal information, which meant the source was not outside the company. She pulled up the internal directory on her screen, then she pulled up the building's visitor log access, which she technically had as executive secretary because Si-hyuk's scheduling required it. She started cross-referencing. She was not supposed to be doing this. This was not secretarial work. This was the kind of thing that security departments did with proper authorization and proper resources, and she had neither. What she had was a specific intolerance for patterns that didn't explain themselves, and several hours before the building locked down for the weekend. She found the first thread at 10:03, a visitor log entry from 6 weeks ago, the week before the elevator had been pulled from service. A contractor badge issued to a S. Sangmo consulting representative. Building maintenance access, 3rd floor mechanical, 7th floor electrical, 44th floor systems. She sat forward. The 44th floor was directly below the executive level. The private elevator's mechanical housing was accessed from the 44th floor. She printed the log entry. Then she pulled every Sangmo consulting badge record going back 18 months and printed those too, and sat at her desk with a stack of papers and a highlighter and worked through them with her heart doing something faster and less controlled than she usually allowed it. By 10:47, she had 7 visits, 4 in the past year, each one logged to a different system in the building, each one timed when she mapped them against Si-hyuk's public schedule to Windows when his security detail was thinnest. She sat back in her chair. She thought about Lim Sang-cheol, about the careful management of information and access, about the fact that every communication routed through his office meant he knew Si-hyuk's schedule better than almost anyone in the building. She thought, this is too large for me. She thought, I need to take this to someone. She thought, the person I would normally take it to is the person I'm not sure I can trust yet. She gathered the papers, folded them into her bag, turned off her workstation, and went home. She did not sleep that night either. The charity gala was on a Saturday 3 weeks later. Zuri had helped organize it from the secretarial side, venue coordination, guest list management, the particular exhausting logistics of an event that needed to feel effortless while being run by people who were also managing 100 other priorities. She had spent 2 weeks on it between her regular responsibilities, and she was tired in the specific way that comes not from the volume of work, but from the sustained performance of composure. She wore an emerald dress she had bought online and spent 2 evenings altering herself because she couldn't afford the tailor and wouldn't put it on the company expense account. She arrived early, checked the seating arrangements twice, confirmed the security walkthrough with building staff, and stood near the entrance as guests began arriving with the professional smile she had long since learned to run on something separate from her actual emotional state. The gala was held at a waterfront event space, all glass and dark wood, and the harbor lights reflecting off the water outside. Several hundred guests, half the city's business community, plus politicians, donors, press. The kind of event Si-hyuk attended because it was necessary and left as early as protocol allowed. He arrived at 8 and found her near the entrance with a tablet and an earpiece and a look of focused concentration he had come to identify as her operating expression. Seating issue with the trade delegation, she said before he could speak. I moved them to table 7. You're being photographed with the foundation chairs at 9:15. The harbor walk afterward, he said. Security cleared it? 2 routes. I've got the second one flagged as preferred. Less exposure from the avenue. He looked at her for a moment. You briefed my security team on exit routes. I suggested. They decided. She looked up from the tablet. Is that a problem? It wasn't. That was the thing. It wasn't, and they both knew it. And there was a version of this moment that could have been something else entirely, except that they were standing in an entrance hall with 200 people around them, and Si-hyuk's expression was doing the careful thing it did when something had moved him, and he was not prepared to acknowledge it publicly. Table 7, he said. Table 7, she confirmed. He walked into the room. Chad. The evening moved the way these events always did. Too many conversations happening simultaneously, the particular managed chaos of people who needed to be seen talking to each other by specific other people. The constant low-level crisis management that Zuri had gotten surprisingly good at. She spent an hour redirecting a minor conflict between 2 competing donors who had been seated too close together. She spent 20 minutes locating a foundation chair who had stepped outside and hadn't told anyone. She ate approximately half of one canapé and forgot about eating after that. At 9:40, Si-hyuk found her near the service corridor with his jacket slightly wrong and an expression that said the evening had gone on long enough. "We're leaving at 10, he said. 10:15, she said. The foundation presentation runs until 10:08 based on the script. 10:15. Your car is in the east lot. I'll have your team pull it to the main entrance by 10:10. He looked at her. You know every exit in this building. I know every exit in every building I work in, she said. It's a habit. Something moved across his face. Not the not-quite smile. Something different. Something that had been building for weeks and hadn't found its form yet. Why? He said. She considered deflecting, chose not to. Because knowing where the doors are makes everything else feel more manageable. When you grow up in a place where things change fast, you learn to know where the exits are. He was quiet for a moment, then, Nigeria. Lagos specifically, then London, then here. You've moved a lot. My brother needed... She stopped, adjusted. The position here was the right position, at the right time. Si-hyuk didn't press. But something in his expression had changed. In the way things change, when a piece of information lands somewhere, it connects with something else. At 10:09, they walked out through the main entrance toward the waiting car. The night was clear. The harbor sat dark and quiet 100 meters away, the reflection of the event space's lights breaking apart on the water. There were maybe a dozen people outside, security staff, drivers, a small cluster of guests leaving early. Zuri was 2 steps behind Si-hyuk, scanning her tablet for the morning's first scheduled item, when she heard it. Not a sound exactly, more the absence of one, the particular held breath quality of air before something happens. She looked up. The man was coming from the left, moving fast, something in his hand catching the light. She didn't think. She moved, grabbed Si-hyuk's arm with both hands and pulled hard left, throwing her own weight behind it. And the sound that came next was enormous and wrong and simultaneous with the impact that hit Si-hyuk's right side and sent them both crashing into the concrete barrier at the entrance's edge. She heard shouting, multiple voices, running feet, the crack of something she identified 3 seconds later as a second shot that went wide into the pillar above them. Si-hyuk's weight was on her. She got her hands under him and found the wet before she understood it was blood, warm and spreading fast through the fabric of his jacket, his shirt, against her palms. And she said his name, loudly, clearly, 2 times, and his eyes were open but working hard to stay that way. I'm here, she said. I have you. Don't move. Security reached them in approximately 8 seconds that felt like 8 minutes. The hospital was 2 kilometers from the event space. She rode in the ambulance because nobody told her she couldn't, and she did not ask for permission. She sat on the narrow bench against the wall and watched the paramedics work and kept her hands pressed flat against her thighs to stop them from shaking. The blood on her palms had started to dry, and the smell of it was very specific and wrong, and she focused on a point on the ceiling of the ambulance and breathed through her mouth. Si-hyuk was conscious in fragments, kept trying to speak. Don't, she said, sharp, immediate. He looked at her. You can tell me later, she said. Her voice had gone very even in the way it went when she was managing something that wanted to become panic. Right now, be quiet and let them work. He was quiet. At the hospital, they took him immediately, and the doors closed, and Zuri stood in a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and fluorescent light, and did the first genuinely unproductive thing she had done in months. She sat down on a plastic chair and put her face in her blood-stained hands, and shook for approximately 90 seconds. Then she stopped, because 90 seconds was what she allowed herself, and she sat up and called Ji-yeon. The blood type was a coincidence in the way that the crooked seal had been a coincidence. It wasn't. The hospital found her in the waiting room at 2 in the morning. A doctor, small and efficient, with the particular manner of someone who had spent years delivering difficult information and had learned to lead with facts. Si-hyuk had lost significant blood. His type was rare. Their current supply was limited. They were testing compatible donors as a precaution. She said yes before he finished explaining. The test took 9 minutes. The result took 3. She was a match. She lay on the narrow hospital cot and stared at the ceiling while the technician prepared what was needed. and she thought about probability and patterns and the particular absurdity of a universe that had placed her here, in this corridor, in this city, with this man's blood type and her own. She thought about the woman her mother had raised, the one who crossed oceans for her brother, the one who walked into rooms where she wasn't wanted and did the work anyway. She gave her blood. She did not tell anyone. She went back to the waiting room and sat in the plastic chair and waited. He woke at 7:14 in the morning. She was still there because she had nowhere else to be, or rather, because she had somewhere else to be. She had a brother in Lagos and a salary still being deposited and work files that needed attention, but she could not make herself leave the hallway. The doctor came for her at 7:20. Si-hyuk was sitting partially upright when she entered, attached to monitors, pale in the specific way that people are pale when they have lost blood, but his eyes were fully open and tracking, and the quality of his attention was intact. She stood in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You pulled me," he said. His voice was rough. "Yes." The shooter came from the left. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, working through something. "You saw him before I did." "I heard it more than saw it," she said. "Something in the air." Si-hyuk looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "They told me about the blood." Zuri's jaw tightened slightly. "I asked them not to." "I know." He paused. "Why?" "Because it wasn't a transaction. I didn't do it so you'd know." Another silence. This one different from all the silences she had catalogued in 2 months of working beside him. Not closed, not calculating, not the careful management of a man who had learned to keep everything slightly out of reach. Open was the word she would have used if she had been in the habit of describing Kwon Si-hyuk's silences to herself, which she was not. "Zuri," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name, not Adebayo, not the secretary. She didn't trust the way that landed in her chest, so she looked at the monitor beside his bed instead of at him. "You need to sleep," she said. "I have files to review." "Zuri," she looked at him. "I was wrong," he said. "About you. About what I said when you walked in." He stopped. His jaw worked slightly, the way a person's jaw works when they are trying to construct something accurately, and the accuracy matters more than the comfort of saying it. The problem was mine. She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "It was." He nodded once. She left to find more coffee and a chair that didn't make her back ache, and stood in the hospital corridor for a moment with her hand against the cool wall and her eyes closed. Something had shifted, irrevocably, in the room behind her. She had known it was coming, the way you know a weather change before it arrives. She had been watching it build for weeks, in the working silences, in the closed door, in the way he said your 30 days are up Friday and meant something more than the words. She had been holding it at careful distance because she knew, with the part of herself that had grown up fast and learned to be practical about things that other people got to be romantic about, that nothing good comes from wanting something inside a power structure that can swallow you whole. But he had said her name, and she had felt it. 3 days after the hospital, she went back to the papers in her bag. The Sangmo consulting records, the visitor badges, the pattern she had mapped 3 weeks ago and hadn't known what to do with. She added what she now knew. The shooting had been coordinated. Security had established that within hours. 2 shooters, 1 primary, 1 backup, pre-positioned. Someone knew the exit route. Someone knew the security arrangement. Someone knew that Si-hyuk would be outside that entrance at that time. Her preferred exit route. The one she had flagged to security. The breath left her. She sat very still at her kitchen table at 6 in the morning with her hands flat on the papers and worked through it. She had flagged the preferred route through security. Security had confirmed it to the transport team. The transport team had communicated it through the event coordinator. The event coordinator reported to Lim Sang-cheol. She did not move for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Ji-yeon. "I need access to personnel files," she said. "Past 3 years. Specifically, I need to know who on the executive floor has had documented contact with Sangmo Consulting." Ji-yeon was quiet for a long moment. "Zuri," she said carefully, "what you're describing is, I know what it is. If you're wrong, I've been wrong before." She looked at the papers on her table. "I'm less wrong than I used to be." Another silence. "Give me until tomorrow." Ji-yeon said. Ji-yeon gave her what she could, which was partial and incomplete and enough. A personnel file note, 3 years old, documenting a disciplinary near miss for Lim Sang-cheol. An unauthorized fund transfer, small amount, ultimately explained away as administrative error. The person who had signed off on accepting the explanation, Kwon Si-hyuk, Si-hyuk's uncle, listed in the company structure as senior advisory board chair. She had seen Tae-moon twice in person, a man in his 60s with a studied warmth that she had noticed but not examined, the kind of warmth that people perform when they have decided you are less dangerous if you like them. She pulled every document she could find with Tae-moon's signature. Board minutes, approval records, the old charitable fund authorizations going back a decade. She found Sangmo Consulting in the earliest records, not as a contractor. As a founding advisory relationship, established the same year, Tae-moon had restructured Cheonhua International following the death of Si-hyuk's parents. The same year. She read that 3 times. Then she opened the archived company history files, old, imperfectly digitized, some of them scanned from physical documents with the text slightly blurred. And she began looking for the name of the African business partner who had supposedly betrayed Si-hyuk's father. She found it in a legal filing from 22 years ago. A civil case, opened and then quietly withdrawn. The partner's name was Adeniyi Obafemi. The accusation, breach of contract, financial misconduct, complicity in the death of Kwon Ji-man, Si-hyuk's father. The case was withdrawn 6 months after it opened. No conviction, no finding. The withdrawal was signed by the plaintiff's representative, Kwon Tae-moon. Zuri sat with that for a very long time. Then she started looking for the financial records from that year. She found the transfer on a Tuesday night at 11:50 in a digitized archive file that had not been properly indexed and appeared in the system under a subsidiary name she recognized from the Sangmo records. And the moment she found it, something physical happened in her chest, a cold spreading sensation that she identified after a moment as the feeling of understanding something you had been looking for and not particularly wanting to find. The transfer was dated 6 weeks before Kwon Ji-man's death, a substantial movement of funds from the company's primary account to an external entity. The authorization signature, Kwon Tae-moon. The stated purpose, investment facilitation, partner advisory. The receiving account, listed in the transfer record by number only, matched when she cross-referenced against the Sangmo Consulting banking record she had found earlier in the night. The account that Sangmo Consulting had been receiving payments from for 22 years. Tae-moon had been paying Sangmo Consulting since before Si-hyuk's father died, before the betrayal that had supposedly destroyed the family, before the African business partner was accused. She closed the file, opened it again, read it again. The accusation against Adeniyi Obafemi, the betrayal that Si-hyuk had been raised on, the wound that had been kept open and salted for 20 years, the source of every prejudice he had walked in carrying, was built on a foundation that had Tae-moon's hands underneath it. Not a foreign partner's treachery, not an outsider's betrayal, his own uncle. She stood up from her kitchen table and walked to the window and stood looking at the city lights with her arms crossed against her body, holding herself together by deliberate effort. She thought about a 9-year-old boy who had lost his parents and been handed a story about why it happened and who was to blame. She thought about 20 years of that story being reinforced, refined, kept current, kept useful. She thought about Si-hyuk sitting across from her in his office saying someone weaponized my childhood without yet knowing how literally true that was. She thought about Zuri herself walking into his boardroom, the deliberate selection of a black foreign secretary, the plan to use her as a provocation, to open the wound, to push Si-hyuk back toward his uncle, to make the old dependence feel natural. She had been a tool, chosen and placed. The rage came up then, not the clean-focused rage she had felt in the boardroom on her first day, but something larger and less controlled, something with teeth, because she had given this man 2 months of her life and her intelligence, and eventually her blood, and the entire time she had been someone else's instrument and hadn't known it. She stood at the window until the rage became something colder and more useful. Then she went back to the table and kept working, because Tae-moon had made one significant error in his calculations. He had selected a secretary for her skin and her foreignness, expecting weakness. He had not accounted for the mind inside the woman he was using. He had not counted on her finding numbers that didn't add up, or her inability to let patterns go unexamined, or the particular obsessive precision that made her replace crooked bottle seals and flag mismatched invoices, and work through archives at midnight until the shape of a 22-year-old crime became visible. He had not counted on her staying. By 2 in the morning, Zuri had assembled enough to take to someone who could do something with it. Not everything, not the complete picture, but enough threads that a proper investigation could follow them to their ends. The question was who? Si-hyuk was still recovering. His security infrastructure had at least one compromised channel, the event coordinator route that had fed her exit plan to the shooters. Lim Sang-cheol sat between her and most of the company's internal systems. She needed someone outside the company's existing structure, someone with the authority to act on what she had found and the independence to act without going through Tai Moon's network. She sat at her kitchen table in the dark with her phone in her hands and thought about the choice in front of her. Whatever she did next, there was no version of it that ended with things being the way they had been. She had the evidence. She knew what it meant, and Tai Moon, whoever he was watching inside that building, was going to figure out soon enough that the secretary who was supposed to have quit in the first week had been working late too many nights in a row, pulling files that had no secretarial justification. She looked at her phone. She looked at the papers on her table. Then she typed a message to Si-hyuk. 4 words. I need to talk. She hit send and set the phone down and looked at the stack of printed records beside her coffee cup. The visitor logs, the transfer records, the archived legal filing, the Sangmo history going back 22 years, and understood, with a certainty that sat heavy and cold in the center of her chest, that she had just crossed a line that she could not uncross. Whatever came next, she was no longer simply a secretary who found numbers that didn't fit. She was the person who had found the number that explained everything. And somewhere across the city, Kwon Tae-moon was still making his plans, still believing his instrument had no will of its own, still counting on the assumption that a woman chosen to be underestimated would remain exactly what he had designed her to be. He had been wrong about her from the moment she walked through that door. He just didn't know it yet. Si-hyuk read the message at 2:47 in the morning. Zuri knew because the read receipt appeared 11 seconds after she sent it, which meant he was awake, which meant he was probably sitting in the hospital room in the dark, the way she imagined him sitting. Not restless, not in pain exactly, just the particular wakefulness of a man whose mind did not know how to stop processing. His reply came in 40 seconds. Come now. She looked at the stack of papers on her table. She looked at the time. She thought about the fact that it was nearly 3 in the morning and she had not slept in approximately 36 hours, and she was about to go to a hospital room and tell a man who was recovering from a gunshot wound that his entire life had been built on a lie constructed by the person who raised him. She packed the papers into her bag, put on her coat, and called a car. The hospital floor was quiet, in the particular way hospital floors are quiet at 3 in the morning. Not silent, but subdued. The fluorescent hum and the distant sounds of equipment and the soft footfall of nurses making rounds, all of it creating a background that made everything feel both more serious and slightly unreal. The security detail outside Si-hyuk's door, 2 men, both of whom she had seen enough times in the past weeks to recognize, let her through without conversation. Someone had told them to expect her, or told them she was cleared, or simply knew that stopping Zuri Adebayo from going where she was going had proven to be a losing proposition. Si-hyuk was sitting up when she came in. His color was better than 3 days ago. The monitors beside him were quieter, the numbers steadier. He was wearing a hospital gown he clearly had strong feelings about and had angled himself as upright as the bed allowed, which told her he had been awake long enough to be irritated by lying down. She set her bag on the chair beside the bed and pulled out the papers. She did not ease into it. There was no version of easing into this. 22 years ago, she said, your father was betrayed by someone inside his own company. The official story is an African business partner named Adeniyi Obafemi. A case was opened against him and then withdrawn. She placed the legal filing on the bed in front of him. The case was withdrawn by your uncle. Si-hyuk looked at the document. He did not pick it up immediately. Keep going, he said. She laid out the transfer records, the Sangmo consulting history, the visitor logs with the 44th floor access, the event coordinator chain that had fed her preferred exit route to the gala shooters. She placed each document in sequence, deliberately, the way she organized everything, not to perform thoroughness, but because the sequence was the argument, and the argument had to be clear. Si-hyuk read each one. He did not speak while he was reading. His face was doing the close-down thing, the careful management, but there was something underneath it she hadn't seen before, a kind of tightening around his jaw that was not anger yet. The thing that precedes anger, the thing that exists in the moment when understanding arrives before the body has caught up to what understanding means. She waited. He finished the last document, set it down, looked at the wall above her head. Sangmo Consulting, he said. His voice was completely level. It's been in the company since the beginning. Since before your father died, the payment relationship predates the accusation against Obafemi. Si-hyuk was quiet. He framed him, Zuri said. Not gently. There was no gentle version. The business partner your father trusted. He was innocent. Your uncle set him up, moved the funds, and built the accusation on top of the transfer records. She watched Si-hyuk's chest move with his breathing, watched the monitors, watched the particular stillness of a man who is holding something enormous very carefully to avoid dropping it. My mother, he said. I haven't found direct documentation, but the pattern. My mother died 3 months after my father. His voice was still level, still exact. An accident. A car. Zuri said nothing. He looked at her. His eyes were very dark and entirely still. He raised me, Si-hyuk said. Yes. He sat with me at the funeral. He told me. He stopped. The jaw tightened further. He told me that the world was dangerous and outsiders couldn't be trusted and that I needed to be harder than my father had been. He told me that. Another stop. Longer this time. For 20 years he told me that story. Yes. And the whole time, yes. The silence in the room was enormous. The monitor beeped, steady and indifferent. Si-hyuk looked at the documents on his hospital bed. Then he picked up the transfer record, the oldest one, dated 6 weeks before his father's death. And he held it, and he looked at it, and Zuri watched his hands, because his hands were telling her things his face wasn't. They were very still. The stillness that comes after shaking, or before it. He recruited you, Si-hyuk said. He selected me for the position deliberately. Black, foreign, female. He expected you to reject me on sight and push you back toward depending on him. She paused. When you didn't fire me, he escalated. The water, the elevator, the gala route. She paused again. I was the provocation he chose because he thought I was the easiest person to use, someone you would never look at twice. Si-hyuk set the document down. He looked at her for a long time. He didn't know you, he said. Zuri held his gaze. No. Something moved through his expression. Something she finally had a word for. Grief. Not fresh grief, like the old accumulated kind that has been living in a person for so long it has become structural, load-bearing, and the moment someone identifies it, the entire building it was supporting shifts. She gave him the space of 60 seconds. Then she said, What do you want to do? What Si-hyuk wanted to do was get out of the hospital bed, which his surgeon had specified he should not do for another 4 days, and which he did on Thursday morning 2 days later, against medical advice and over the explicit objection of 3 separate staff members, because the criminal summit that would determine control of his organization was scheduled for Friday night and Tae-moon had already begun moving. Zuri found out about the summit from Ji Yeon, who found out from one of Si-hyuk's senior operations staff, who found out because Si-hyuk had spent 2 days making phone calls from his hospital room that had the entire executive infrastructure of Cheonhua International in a quiet, controlled panic. She went to his apartment Thursday afternoon. He opened the door himself. He was standing upright, which cost him. She could see it in the slight compression around his eyes, the particular angle of his posture that distributed weight away from his right side. You should be lying down, she said. I know. Your surgeon, I know what my surgeon said. She looked at him. He looked at her. They had reached, over the past 2 months and more acutely, over the past 72 hours, a point in their communication where certain arguments didn't need to be completed because both of them already knew how they ended. She came inside. His apartment was not what she had expected, not the cold minimalism she had projected onto him from the boardroom aesthetic, but something more lived in and less deliberate. Books on actual shelves, not decorative ones. A kitchen that showed evidence of use. Photographs on one wall, older ones. A family she recognized from the archived company history. His parents, young, before everything. She did not look at those long. He sat at the table, carefully, with the specific care of someone managing pain and not acknowledging it, and she set her bag down and pulled out her laptop. "The summit," she said. "Tell me what Tae-moon gets if you don't show." Si-hyuk's operations ran through a network of aligned criminal organizations across the southern coast, held together by personal relationships that Si-hyuk had built over a decade, and that required, periodically, his physical presence at the kind of meetings that did not appear in any calendar. The summit was one of those meetings. A legitimacy question had been raised, she gathered, from what Si-hyuk told her in the compressed, careful language of a man explaining a system he had never needed to explain before, by two of the aligned organizations who had noticed the gala shooting and were watching to see whether Kwon Si-hyuk was still the man they had agreed to follow. If he didn't appear, Tae-moon was positioned to step in. He had been building that positioning for months. "He's been preparing this for years," Si-hyuk said. "Not just the past months. Years. I know." Every move he made, he stopped. His jaw worked. Every time I deferred to him. Every meeting where I took his counsel. He looked at the table. I handed it to him myself. "You were 9 years old when he started," she said. "You handed him nothing. He took it." Si-hyuk looked at her. "There's a difference," she said, "between what was done to you and what you chose. You don't get to collapse those together just because it's easier to blame yourself." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You're very direct." "Yes." "It's inconvenient. I know. Are we working or are we talking about my personality?" The not-quite smile. Exhausted and real and more open than any version of it she had seen. "Working," he said. The plan that took shape over the next 18 hours was not elegant. It was not clean. It had 4 points of potential failure that Zuri identified, and 2 more that Si-hyuk added, and neither of them had a good solution for any of them. And by 2 in the morning on Friday, they had arrived at a version of it that was the best available option rather than a good one. The evidence she had compiled needed to reach 2 places simultaneously: the criminal network's senior members, who needed to understand what Tae-moon had done and why his authority was fraudulent, and an external authority that could act on the financial crimes and the attempted murders in a way that insulated Si-hyuk from direct implication while dismantling Tae-moon's parallel operations. Si-hyuk handled the first track. He had 3 men he trusted completely. She learned their names over the course of the night, and they began moving the documentation through the network's internal channels before dawn. Zuri handled the second track herself. She had, through the accumulation of 2 months of secretarial access and 2 sleepless weeks of forensic archiving, assembled a package that documented everything: the original fund transfer, the framing of Obafemi, the Sangmo consulting payment history, the building access records, the sabotaged elevator, the tampered water, the gala route communication chain. She organized it with the same methodical precision she brought to everything, cross-referenced and indexed and formatted so that the information could be understood without additional context. She sent it at 4:47 Friday morning. Then she made coffee because she needed something to do with her hands, and she stood in Si-hyuk's kitchen while it brewed and looked at the photographs on his wall and thought about a 9-year-old boy who had been handed a broken story and taught to build himself around it. She thought about Toby, about the last phone call, Toby's voice thin but present, their mother's voice underneath it, all the things their family communicated in the spaces between words. She thought about what she was doing in this apartment, in this city, for a man who had told her on her first day that she was unwelcome. She thought about what it meant that she was still here. The coffee finished. She poured 2 cups. Si-hyuk appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had not slept either. She handed him the coffee without comment. He took it, stood beside her at the counter. "My father wanted to expand into Africa," he said. "That was what the partnership was about. He believed the future of the company was international. He believed—" He stopped, drank the coffee. "Tae-moon told me he was naive, that his trust in outsiders killed him." He looked at the countertop. 20 years of my father's dream being used as a warning against itself. Zuri was quiet. "Obafemi," Si-hyuk said. "What happened to him?" "I don't know. The case withdrawal was 22 years ago. I didn't have time to trace him further." Si-hyuk nodded. Something in his face settled into a decision. "Find him," he said. "After today," she said. "After today," he agreed. Tae-moon called at noon. Si-hyuk took the call in the living room with the phone on speaker and Zuri sitting across the table with her laptop open and a notepad in front of her, because she had gotten very precise about documenting things in the past 72 hours. Taemoon's voice was warm. It was always warm. She had noticed that in their two brief personal interactions, and she noticed it now. The particular warmth of a man who had spent decades using it as a tool and had become so practiced that it sounded completely natural. Si-hyuk, I heard you left the hospital. A pause with exactly the right texture of concern in it. You should be resting. I'm fine, uncle. The summit tonight. I'll be there. Another pause, slightly different in texture than the first one. You're sure that's wise? Given your condition, I'm sure. Si-hyuk's voice was exactly as it always was. Level, uninflected, giving nothing. I'll see you tonight. He ended the call. He looked at Zuri. She looked at him. He knows something has changed, she said. Yes. How long before he moves? He was always going to move tonight. The summit is his timetable, not mine. Si-hyuk set the phone on the table. If I appear, he loses the narrative. If I don't appear, he uses my absence to consolidate. He paused. Either way, tonight is the night he chose. And the shipyard, she said. He looked at her sharply. I've been listening to the patterns, she said. He needs you away from the summit at a specific moment. He needs a reason that's credible. She held his gaze. If the summit goes wrong for him, he'll need leverage, something to use as a failsafe. Si-hyuk was very still. He'll come for me, she said. I'm the easiest piece to move. The secretary, the outsider, the woman he chose specifically because he thought I was disposable. Zuri, I'm not wrong. He looked at her for a long moment with something in his expression she had never seen there before. Not the management, not the careful distance, but something raw and direct and very close to the surface. No, he said. You're not wrong. Then we account for it. How? She told him. The first car arrived at the apartment building at 4:15. Zuri saw it from the window. A dark sedan, parked at an angle that wasn't quite right for a building resident, at a position that covered the main exit. She noted it without moving from the window, the way she had learned to note things that didn't belong. She told Si-hyuk. He made a call. 2 minutes later, he told her, 3 vehicles, front, east side parking structure. Your men? Some of them. He paused. Not all of them. The fracture in his organization had been building since the gala. She had understood this in outline from what Si-hyuk had explained over the past 2 days. That Taemoon had spent months cultivating relationships with 2 of Si-hyuk's senior operational lieutenants, offering them positions in the restructured organization he was planning. The summit tonight was supposed to be the moment those relationships became public realignments. How many do you trust? She asked. Enough, he said. And then, maybe. She looked at him. He looked at her. That's not a number, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. They left the apartment at 5:30 through a service exit Zuri had identified from the building's maintenance blueprints, which she had pulled from the city property records the previous night because at a certain point locating exit routes had stopped being a habit and become a necessity. 3 men met them in the service alley. She recognized one, a man named Dae-won, who she had seen twice on the executive floor, always in the background, always watching. He looked at her with an expression she read as assessment rather than hostility, which she decided to count as neutral. Si-hyuk said something to them in Korean, too fast for her to follow. She caught her name and the Korean word for documents, and one other word she had learned in her second month on the executive floor because she had heard it in enough tense conversations to look it up. The word was uncle. The 3 men's expressions, collectively, shifted. She watched Dae-won's face move through something that looked like controlled fury, which told her he had not known, or had suspected and not been certain. Now he was certain. They moved. The summit location was a building in Busan's port district. Not the public port, but the older industrial section, where warehouse structures from a previous decade sat alongside newer logistics operations, and the general architectural aesthetic communicated that nobody was particularly interested in being observed. The road to it ran past the old shipyard. Zuri saw the car blocking the road from 200 meters away. and she understood before the car stopped what it meant. Because she had told Si-hyuk this was coming, and she had been right, and being right about it did not make it less frightening. The call came to Si-hyuk's phone while their car was still rolling to a stop. Tae-moon's voice, still warm, still practiced, with something different in it now. Not quite dropped, but closer to its actual temperature. "There's someone I need you to come and collect," Tae-moon said. "Before the summit. A misunderstanding I want to clear up in person." Si-hyuk said nothing. "The shipyard," Tae-moon said. "You know the one. Your father and I used to walk there before everything." A pause. "Come alone, or don't come to the summit at all." The call ended. Zuri's hands were flat on her thighs. Her breathing was deliberate and conscious. Her heart was doing something loud and poorly organized that she was managing by focusing on the concrete details in front of her. The blocked road, the car ahead, the positions of Tae-moon's people that she had been calculating since they left the apartment. "He has her," Si-hyuk said. She looked at him. He was looking at his phone. His face was doing the close thing, the management. But underneath it, visible to her now in the way that things become visible once you have learned to read them, was something that was not calculation, was not strategy, was fear. "He has Ji-yeon," he said. Zuri's stomach dropped. Ji-yeon, who had been quietly, carefully kind to Zuri from the first week, who had given her the personnel files and the partial information and said, "Give me until tomorrow," with the voice of someone who knew she was taking a risk and took it anyway, who had access to the same information Zuri had been pulling and who Tae-moon's people would have identified as the source. "How many men does he have at the shipyard?" she said. Si-hyuk looked at Daewon. Daewon said something in Korean. Then, in careful English, 12, maybe 15, loyal to the uncle. "And the summit?" she said. "Summit proceeds without us. Uncle claims control," Si-hyuk said. His voice was completely flat. His two lieutenants announced their realignment. "It's finished." He looked at the blocked road ahead. Zuri looked at it too. "The summit," she said carefully, "needs you there." "Ji-yeon needs me at the shipyard." "Yes." She paused. "I know." He looked at her. The fear was still there underneath the surface. And underneath the fear was something else. The thing that had been building since the hospital room, since her name in his voice at 7:14 in the morning, since coffee in his kitchen at 5 a.m. She saw him arrive at the decision before he said it, watched it happen across his face. "The summit can wait," he said. "I know," she said again. He turned to Daewon and began speaking in Korean. She caught enough. The word for shipyard, the word for split, the word she'd looked up that meant behind them. Daewon was already on his phone. Zuri unzipped her bag. She had the full document package on an encrypted drive. 2 copies. The second one she had prepared while Si-hyuk wasn't watching because she was a person who understood that redundancy was not paranoia, but mathematics. She put 1 copy in her coat pocket. She looked at her phone. The confirmation she had been waiting for, the external contact acknowledging receipt of the full package, had arrived at 4:52 this morning, which meant what she had built was already in motion regardless of what happened at the shipyard. She put the phone away. Si-hyuk was watching her. "You're not staying in the car," he said. It wasn't a question. "Ji-yeon is there because she helped me," she said. "So no." He looked at her for a moment with that expression she finally had a complete word for, a word she had been circling for weeks and had not let herself land on because landing on it had consequences she wasn't ready for. Love was the word, not fully formed yet, not named between them, but present, unmistakably, in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, and in the way she had given blood at 2 in the morning without telling anyone, and in the way they had spent a night building a plan in his kitchen like 2 people who had already decided, without discussing it, that they were on the same side of something. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Stay behind Daewon." "I'll stay where I can see." "Zuri." "Si-hyuk." Something crossed his face. The almost smile, darker than usual and without any of the lightness she associated with it. "Fine," he said. The shipyard was dark when they arrived. Old structures, corrugated metal walls, the smell of salt water and rust, and something industrial underneath. The harbor was visible through gaps in the buildings. Lights on the water, a container ship moving slowly on the horizon, ordinary life continuing at a distance from whatever was about to happen here. Tae-moon was standing in the center of the main warehouse space when they came through. He looked exactly as he always looked. The studied warmth, the careful positioning of a man who wanted to appear relaxed because appearing relaxed communicated control. He was wearing a suit which struck Zuri as a specific kind of statement, the intention to be formal, to make this moment feel like something he had choreographed. Ji-yeon was against the far wall, seated, hands bound, a cut above her eyebrow that had dried and darkened. She was frightened but conscious, and when she saw Zuri, she did something with her face that was half relief and half an expression. Zuri couldn't read but filed. 8 of Tae-moon's men were visible. She cataloged their positions automatically, the way she cataloged all positions now, because knowing where things were made everything else feel more manageable. Daewon and Si-hyuk's 2 other men had come in behind them and stopped at the edge of the space. Tae-moon looked at Si-hyuk. "You came," he said. The warmth was still there. Habitual. Possibly even real, in whatever way warmth can be real, in a man who has spent 20 years using it to manage a person he destroyed. "Let her go," Si-hyuk said. "In a moment." Tae-moon's eyes moved to Zuri. Something in them shifted. A very small adjustment, the recalibration of a man encountering something that has not performed as expected. "The secretary. She's more persistent than I anticipated." Si-hyuk said nothing. Tae-moon looked back at him. "You've seen the documents she assembled." "Yes." And you know what they say." Tae-moon was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular tone of a man who has decided that denial is no longer the efficient choice. "Your father was going to make a decision that would have cost this company everything. He trusted the wrong people. He was—" a pause. "He was not equipped for the world he was operating in." Si-hyuk's breathing changed. She heard it from 2 feet away. A very slight alteration, deeper, more deliberate. "He was my father," he said. "He was a man who was going to hand everything your grandfather built to foreign partners, who would have dismantled it." Tae-moon's voice remained even. The warmth was mostly gone now. What was underneath it was colder and more precise, the voice of the actual man who had been living behind the warmth. "I protected what he couldn't protect. I raised you. I made you what you are." Si-hyuk looked at him. The silence held for 4 full seconds. "You broke a 9-year-old child," Si-hyuk said, "and then spent 20 years calling those broken pieces strength." Tae-moon's expression moved. "Release her," Si-hyuk said, looking at Ji-yeon. For a moment nothing happened. Then one of Tae-moon's men stepped toward Ji-yeon, and 3 things happened in a sequence so compressed that Zuri experienced them as nearly simultaneous. Ji-yeon, who had been working her hands against her restraints for the past 10 minutes, in the stillness that nobody had monitored carefully enough, pulled free. Tae-moon made a gesture, small, practiced, the kind of gesture that had a meaning. Zuri didn't know but that Daewon clearly did, because he was moving before it completed. And the man nearest to Zuri moved toward her. She didn't wait. She drove her elbow back and up with the specific angle that she had learned in a self-defense course in London, that she had taken not because she expected to need it, but because she had always preferred knowing where the exits were. And the impact connected, and the man stumbled and she was already moving, already going for the space between him and the wall, already calculating the distance to Ji-yeon and the route that had the fewest of Tae-moon's people between them. The warehouse erupted. Not cleanly. Nothing about it was clean. It was loud and chaotic, and she couldn't see Si-hyuk for 12 seconds that felt geological in duration. And when she did see him, he was struggling with 2 of Tae-moon's men, and he was favoring his right side with the specific carefulness of a man managing an injury he cannot afford to acknowledge. She reached Ji-yeon. "Can you walk?" "Yes." Ji-yeon's voice was shaking but functional. "Then walk, toward the door. Don't run yet." She put herself between Ji-yeon and the nearest of Tae-moon's men and moved. Across the warehouse, Tae-moon was not fighting. He was watching, positioned near the far wall, away from the chaos, the posture of a man who had always preferred to arrange events from a distance. She tracked him while moving, the way she tracked everything, and she saw the moment he reached a conclusion and took a step toward a side door that had a vehicle outside. She'd seen it when they came in, a dark car positioned for exit. She looked at Si-hyuk. Si-hyuk looked at Tae-moon. He moved toward him with the deliberateness of a man who has decided that pain is not currently the relevant variable. cutting through the space between them, with his two remaining men running interference, and Tae-moon turned toward the side door and found it already blocked, because Daewon was there. Tae-moon stopped. He turned back. Si-hyuk was 3 meters away. The two men looked at each other across the wreckage of 22 years. Tae-moon's composure was intact. She had to give him that. Whatever he was built from, it did not crack easily. His hands were still. His face was still. The warmth was gone entirely now, and what was underneath it was not monstrous exactly, which was perhaps the most disturbing thing about it. What was underneath it was just a man, practical, precise, convinced of the correctness of his own arithmetic. "You would have been nothing," Tae-moon said, "without what I gave you." Si-hyuk stopped in front of him. "My father's name," he said. "Say it." Tae-moon's jaw tightened slightly. "Kwon Ji-man," Si-hyuk said. "Say his name." The silence stretched. "He deserved better than what you did," Si-hyuk said. "And so did I." He took the documents from the inside pocket of his jacket, a copy, folded, the original transfer record on top, and he held them up in front of Tae-moon. "It's already gone," he said. "Everything you built on top of his grave. It's already moving." Tae-moon looked at the documents. Then he looked at Zuri. She met his gaze from across the warehouse, one hand on Ji-yeon's arm, both of them standing very still. "You chose poorly," he said to Zuri. The warmth was entirely absent now. His voice was flat and specific. "You should have taken the money and gone home." "I did go home," she said, "when I first walked into that boardroom." She held his gaze. "You just didn't know it yet." Tae-moon looked at her for a moment. Then Daewon moved toward him, and Si-hyuk's other men moved, and Tae-moon, who had spent 2 decades arranging events from a distance and was not built for the moment when distance ran out, made the only calculation left available to him. He did not run. He sat down on a crate near the wall. He folded his hands. And he waited, with the composure of a man who had always known this was a possible ending and had decided somewhere along the way that maintaining the performance was the last form of control available to him. Outside the shipyard, through the gaps in the corrugated walls, the lights of Busan Harbor moved on the water. The container ship had reached the open harbor and was turning slowly toward the sea. And inside the warehouse, surrounded by the evidence of 22 years of carefully constructed lies, Kwon Si-hyuk stood in front of the man who had raised him, and the man who had raised him said nothing, and the silence between them was full of everything that could not be given back. The police lights came through the shipyard's broken windows in long, sweeping arcs, blue and white cutting across the corrugated walls. Across the faces of men who had spent the past 40 minutes in various states of violence and were now standing in the particular stillness that follows when the fighting stops, but the adrenaline hasn't. Zuri counted bodies by their positions. Not dead. She did that accounting fast and with relief. But down, sitting, being held, being handled by Si-hyuk's men with the efficient professionalism of people who had done this before. 3 of Tae-moon's people had been disarmed near the east wall. 2 more sat on the warehouse floor with their backs against a support column, one of them holding his arm at an angle that communicated a dislocated shoulder. The man Zuri had elbowed was on his feet but staying very still, which she took as a sign that he had correctly assessed his situation. Ji-yeon was standing. That was the first thing Zuri confirmed when the lights came on. Ji-yeon, thermal blanket now draped over her shoulders by someone whose job it was to produce thermal blankets at moments like this, standing on her own feet with the cut above her eyebrow freshly dressed, and the specific expression of a woman who has decided she is not going to fall apart tonight and is successfully executing that decision. Si-hyuk was upright. That was the second thing. He was standing in the center of the warehouse floor with 3 of his men flanking him and Tae-moon 6 feet away, and the distance between them had a quality that Zuri could feel from 30 feet away. Not physical, not yet, but the particular charged quality of a distance that is being maintained by will rather than circumstance. Tae-moon looked at the police lights with the expression of a man doing rapid calculations. Si-hyuk looked at Tae-moon with no expression at all. The lead investigator came through the main door and the room shifted around him. Tae-moon's men moving in the way people move when authority they cannot manage has entered a space.
Si-hyuk's men holding their positions with the practiced stillness of people who understood that the next 20 minutes required complete silence and complete cooperation and would determine more than the next 20 minutes. Zuri moved to Ji-yeon.
She put her hand on Ji-yeon's arm. Just that, just contact, because Ji-yeon was shaking slightly underneath the stillness she was performing. And sometimes what a person needs is not words, but the physical confirmation that someone is beside them. Ji-yeon looked at her. "I'm okay," Ji-yeon said. Her voice was steady enough. "I know," Zuri said, "but you're shaking." "That's the adrenaline, not—" Ji-yeon stopped, looked at the investigator moving through the space. "Is it over?" Zuri looked at Taemun, who was now being approached by two officers with the specific body language of people who have done this enough times that it has become procedural. He stood straight. He did not resist. He said something to the nearest officer in a voice too low for her to hear, and the officer responded briefly and officially, and Taemun nodded once as though acknowledging a point of order. Even now, even here, at the end of everything he'd built over 22 years, with it all coming apart around him in a warehouse full of police lights and the evidence of his own making, even now, the performance held. The composure, the dignity of a man who had decided that how he carried himself in defeat was the last form of control available to him. She understood it. She did not forgive it, but she understood the shape of it. "Yes," she said to Ji-yeon. "It's over." The official accounting took what felt like years and was actually 6 hours. Statements given, documented, cross-referenced. The package she had sent at 4:52 that morning had arrived at 3 destinations simultaneously. The Financial Crimes Division, the independent legal authority she had spent 4 days identifying as the cleanest available option, and a senior contact within the network's internal structure whose identity Si-hyuk had given her in his apartment 2 days ago with the specific gravity of a man who rarely trusted anyone with that particular name. All 3 had acted. The financial crimes documentation she'd assembled, 22 years of payment records, the original transfer, the framing of Obafemi, the building access logs, the sabotaged elevator, the tampered water, the Galaroot communication chain, formed the structural core. The investigators had spent the preceding hours building their own corroborating layers on top of it, and by the time she was sitting on the ground outside the warehouse at 4 in the morning, what had been assembled was not a theory or a suspicion, but a case of a kind that did not typically come apart. She knew this. She had built it to be that. Si-hyuk found her at 4:07, by her phone's clock, and sat down beside her against the corrugated wall with the careful movement of a man managing something he was not acknowledging out loud. The harbor was quiet. The city's lights broke apart on the water in the way they always did. Long columns of yellow and white, constantly moving, never quite the same shape twice. She waited for him to speak. He didn't, for a while. They sat in the cold and the silence, and she could hear his breathing, slightly deeper and more deliberate than normal. The breath of someone managing pain with conscious effort, and she chose not to address it because he knew his own body and he had made his decisions, and some conversations were not hers to initiate. "The summit," she said, when enough time had passed. "Daewon went," he said, "with the full documentation." "How did it land?" "Enough." He paused. "2 of his people tried to hold the realignment. The others—" He exhaled slowly. "When you show 20 criminal organization heads that the man claiming authority fabricated a death and spent 20 years building a structure on top of a lie, most of them are practical about what that means for future business arrangements. And the 2 who held? There'll be a problem," he said. "For a while, not forever." She nodded. The harbor moved. Something in the warehouse behind them shifted, a sound of movement, voices in Korean too distant to parse. "My mother," he said. She waited. The investigator, when he came to the hospital, he had a preliminary finding. Si-hyuk looked at the water. His jaw was working in the way it worked when accuracy mattered more than comfort. "The car accident. 3 months after my father." He stopped, started again. "It wasn't an accident. The cold came in off the water." She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. There was the fact of it, and the weight of it, and the particular cruelty of a thing that had been a lie for 22 years and was now a different kind of truth. Not better, just visible, which was its own form of damage. I was 9, he said. Yes. He sat with me at the funeral. His voice was completely even. The management so complete and so practiced that it no longer even looked like management. It looked like his natural state, which was the most insidious thing about it, that the armor had been on so long he couldn't entirely feel where it ended, and he began. He held my hand. Zuri pressed her lips together. He told me, Si-hyuk said, that the world was brutal and that trust was a liability, and that the man who had broken our family was the reason my parents were gone. He paused. I believed him. For 22 years I believed him. You were 9, she said again, and 10, and 11. And every year after that you were a child who had been handed a framework by the only adult left in your life. And children build themselves around the frameworks they're given because they don't have another option. She turned and looked at him directly. You don't get to treat your 9-year-old self like an adult who chose wrong. He looked at her. The adult has things to answer for, she said. The child doesn't. He was quiet for a long moment. The things I said to you, he said. The first day. Yes. In front of 20 people. Yes. That was the adult, he said. Yes, she said. It was. He held her gaze. She did not make it easier. She had decided some weeks ago that making things easier for Kwon Si-hyuk when he was doing the genuine work of examining himself was not kindness, but avoidance. And she had never been particularly good at avoidance when the thing being avoided was true. I know, he said. Good, she said. Another silence. This one lighter, somehow, in the specific way that silences become lighter after the heavy things inside them have been named. Obafemi, he said. I'll find him, she said. I told you I would. After Taemoon, after the company, after all of it, he paused. There is still a man somewhere who spent 22 years carrying something that was never his. Yes, she said. There is. He should know, Si-hyuk said. What was done, what was found, that someone... He stopped. That it wasn't buried. He should know, she agreed. The harbor moved. The city's ordinary business continued at a distance, indifferent and constant. Go back inside, she said. You need to sit down and you're not going to say so. He didn't argue, which told her more about how much the injury was costing him than any argument would have. He got up. Carefully, with the specific distribution of weight she had been watching all night. At the door he stopped and looked back at her. Come inside, he said. In a few minutes, she said. He went in. She sat for exactly 4 more minutes with her back against the cold corrugated wall and her hands in her lap and the harbor spread out in front of her, and she let herself feel what she had been managing away from the surface all night. The fear that had been running underneath the action, cold and constant. The specific fear of a person who has put themselves between something terrible and someone they care about and is only now, in the aftermath, allowing themselves to account for what that cost. She had been frightened in the warehouse. She had been frightened in the car on the way there. She had been frightened every day for 8 months in ways that varied in intensity and shape but had never entirely left. She sat with that for 4 minutes, precisely. Then she went inside. Lim Sang-cheol's resignation arrived on a Tuesday, 4 weeks after the shipyard. Zuri was at her desk when it came through, routed correctly now, directly to Si-hyuk's office through the restructured system she had rebuilt, and she read it because it passed through her queue as part of the documentation process she had implemented. It was 2 paragraphs. Formal, correct, citing personal reasons with the particular vagueness of a man who understood that specificity would not serve him. No acknowledgement of what had been found or what he had facilitated, or the 9 months he had spent routing information through his office with the practiced efficiency of a person who had long since stopped examining what the information was being used for. She forwarded it to Si-hyuk with a 1-line note. Resignation from Lim Sang-cheol. Recommend acceptance. No counteroffer. Si-hyuk's reply came in 6 minutes. Agreed. Handle the exit process. She handled it. She did not feel particularly good about it or particularly bad. She felt the specific weight of a thing that had been wrong for a long time being correctly addressed, which was not the same as satisfaction, but was something adjacent to it. The resolution of an equation that had been unbalanced, clicking finally into its correct form. Ji-yeon came to her desk that afternoon. He's gone? She said. Clearing his office now, Zuri said. He'll be out by 4. Ji-yeon sat down in the chair across from Zuri's desk, the visitor's chair, which Zuri had replaced in her first month because the original had been positioned 2 inches lower than standard, a detail that she suspected was deliberate and found intolerable. The new one was level. I've been here 7 years, Ji-yeon said. He's been here for 19. Yes. The whole time I worked here, he controlled every piece of information that reached the 48th floor. Ji-yeon looked at her hands. I told myself it was just how things worked, that it was above my level. You've said that before, Zuri said. I know. Ji-yeon looked up. I'm saying it again because I'm still trying to understand how I let it be true for 7 years. Zuri was quiet for a moment. She thought about what she had learned in 8 months of working inside a structure that had been deliberately built to obscure itself, how ordinary the mechanisms of it looked from inside, how the people within them were not all complicit in the way Tae-moon was complicit, how most of them were simply people who had made the practical calculation that the way things were was the way things had to be. You weren't the architect, she said, and you weren't the builder. You were a person working in a building someone else designed. She paused. That doesn't mean you don't have to look at it, but it means the accounting is different. Ji-yeon considered that. You're not angry? She said. At me. For not. You helped me when it mattered, Zuri said. You gave me the personnel files. You told me about the water, the elevator. You were in that shipyard because you took a risk to help me, and Tae-moon's people knew it. She held Ji-yeon's gaze. That's what I know about you. Ji-yeon was quiet. The rest of it, Zuri said, is yours to work out, not mine. Ji-yeon nodded once. She stood up. She paused at the edge of the desk. He's announcing your promotion at the board meeting Thursday, she said. Zuri looked up. Director of International Operations. Full title, full authority, full executive compensation. Ji-yeon's mouth did something that was not quite a smile, but was the architecture of one. The vote was 14-0. Zuri held that for a moment. 14, she said. The 4 who abstained in the preliminary reading came around when someone, I don't know who, Ji-yeon's expression suggested she knew exactly who, sent them the full record of your work for the past 8 months, the accounting recovery, the contract irregularities, the Port Authority review. She paused. The complete reconstruction of the document management system. That took 3 weeks, Zuri said. It showed, Ji-yeon said. She left. Zuri sat at her desk for approximately 45 seconds, looking at the middle distance, feeling the weight of 14 votes and 3 weeks of document architecture and 8 months of staying when leaving had been available. Then she opened the next file and kept working. The board meeting was on a Thursday morning with autumn light coming through the 48th floor windows in long, flat bars, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more significant than it normally does, which Zuri noticed and filed under atmospheric detail, not relevant. She sat at the table this time, not at the far end, not in the secretary's chair positioned slightly back from the main table surface, but at it, at one of the primary seats, with a nameplate in front of her that read Director Adebayo and a water glass and a leather portfolio and the specific internal experience of a person who has arrived somewhere they were not originally expected to arrive. Si-hyuk ran the meeting from the head of the table. He did not look at her differently than he looked at anyone else during the formal portion, which she appreciated because professionalism was professionalism, and she had not spent 8 months building a reputation for competence in order to compromise it with any form of partiality. He presented the restructuring plan, the international partnership framework, the operational changes, and the new reporting structure with the precise, compressed fluency of a man who had spent 2 months immersed in the details of dismantling something that had been built over 2 decades and rebuilding it into a shape his father had originally imagined. She asked 3 questions during the presentation. All 3 were substantive. 2 of them identified potential friction points in the international partnership framework that Si-hyuk acknowledged and incorporated into his notes. The third opened a discussion about legal exposure in one of the transitional markets that ran for 20 minutes and ended with a consensus that required a subcommittee to examine it further. The board member who had once, 8 months ago, before the world rearranged itself, exchanged a look across the table that Zuri had noted and filed and not forgotten, sat 3 chairs down from her, and participated in the discussion with the careful engagement of a man who was doing the work of updating his assessment in real time. She noticed. She did not make it easy for him or difficult for him. She simply did the work, the way she had always done the work, and let the work be the argument. After the meeting in the corridor, Si-hyuk came to stand beside her while she was reviewing her notes. "The subcommittee," he said. "Can you lead it?" "Yes," she said. "I'll need the full legal framework from the transitional market team by Monday." "Done," he paused. "The question about the partnership framework. The friction point you identified in the second tier." "The indemnity structure is wrong," she said. "It puts Cheonhua in an exposure position if the local regulatory environment shifts. I've seen it before in West African market entry. The lawyers built it for a stable environment, and the environment is not stable." Si-hyuk looked at her. "Your experience in Lagos," he said, "and London." "I worked in a firm that had 3 West African market entries go wrong in 18 months because they used the same indemnity structure." She looked at her notes. "The fix isn't complicated. It's just not what the lawyers defaulted to." He nodded. "Fix it." "I was going to," she said, the not-quite smile, still present, still doing the thing to her composure that she had mostly learned to manage. "Thursday lunch," he said. "The Obafemi reply should be back by then." She looked up. "You sent the letter." "Tuesday." He paused. "You said to write it myself." "I know what I said." "You were right," he said. "It needed to be mine." She held his gaze. Then she looked back at her notes. "Thursday," she said. "Well, Adenia Obafemi's reply arrived on a Wednesday. Si-hyuk brought it to her office, not sent, not forwarded electronically, but carried, folded, in the inside pocket of his jacket, which told her something about what the letter meant to him that he would not have said in words. He set it on her desk. She read it. The handwriting was careful and slightly formal, the penmanship of a generation that had been taught to write as though the letter would be kept. The language was measured, not warm exactly, but not cold. The language of a man who had learned to be precise about what he offered and what he withheld, because precision was the thing that had kept him intact. He acknowledged the letter. He acknowledged the documentation that had been shared with him through the legal channels, the transfer records, the framing, the withdrawal signed by Tae-moon. He wrote that he had spent 22 years not knowing whether the truth existed somewhere in a form that could be found, and that knowing it existed changed something he did not yet have a word for. He wrote that he would receive Kwon Si-hyuk in Abuja. When Si-hyuk was ready, with no preconditions and no expectations, he wrote that he had known Si-hyuk's father for 3 years before G-man's death, and that in those 3 years he had understood G-man to be a man of unusual integrity. Not perfect, not without flaws, but genuinely oriented toward something larger than himself. He wrote that the partnership they had been building was not naive idealism, but practical vision, the kind that requires 2 people willing to be misunderstood in the short term for the sake of something that makes sense in the long term. He wrote, "Your father believed in something worth building. I believed in it too. Whatever comes next, that belief was real." Zuri set the letter down. Her throat was doing something she managed by pressing her lips together and looking at the window for 3 seconds. "When do you want to go?" she said. "As soon as the subcommittee work is finished," Si-hyuk said. 2 months, maybe 3. "I'll arrange the travel." She paused. "I want to come." He looked at her. "I know it's not—" She stopped, adjusted. "Ji-yeon can cover the operational calendar. Sua can manage the communications. I want to be there." She held his gaze. "I found him. I found the records. I want to see it close." Si-hyuk held her gaze for a long moment. "Yes," he said. The company gala in the 8th month fell on a Saturday in late autumn, with the harbor cold and clear, and the city doing the thing it did in that particular season. Something about the light, the angle of it in the early evening, that made Busan look like a different city than the rain-soaked version she had arrived to, cleaner and sharper and somehow more itself. She wore a deep green dress that a tailor 2 streets from her apartment had spent 45 opinionated minutes helping her get right. She arrived early, confirmed the logistics, checked 3 things that turned out to be fine, and 1 thing that turned out to need immediate quiet correction, and stood near the entrance as guests arrived with the professional composure of someone who had been doing this for 8 months and had gotten extremely good at it. Sua, her assistant, appeared at her elbow at 7:40 with a tablet and an earpiece and an expression of focused efficiency. "The trade delegation is seated," Sua said. "Table 9. The board chair from the Incheon partnership is running 20 minutes late. His driver is in traffic on the coastal road." "Move his first introduction to 8:40, Zuri said. "Tell him 8:30 to give us margin." "Done." Sua moved away. Ji-yeon found her at 8:15 near the bar, with a glass of something sparkling and the specific expression of a person who has survived something and is finding the other side of it livable. "You look extraordinary," Ji-yeon said. "I look like myself," Zuri said. "I've decided that's the same thing." Ji-yeon laughed. A real one, the kind that had become more common in the months since the shipyard, as though something that had been held tight for years had been released and was only now remembering how to move freely. "He's been here since 7, Ji-yeon said, which is an hour before the start time." "I know," Zuri said. "He sent me 3 messages about the seating arrangement." He straightened his jacket 4 times in the hallway outside his office. Zuri looked at her. "I counted," Ji-yeon said, without apology. Zuri turned toward the room. The evening moved. She managed the room in the particular way she had learned, not by controlling it, but by maintaining a light awareness of its temperature, the way a musician maintains awareness of the room's acoustics, adjusting automatically and without drawing attention to the adjustment. A redirected conversation here, a quiet word to a catering staff member there. The deliberate positioning of herself between 2 board members who had been edging toward a conversation she recognized as the kind that benefits from an interruption. Si-hyuk worked the room from the other side. She tracked him through it the way she tracked everything. Not surveillance, not anxiety, but the comfortable awareness of a person who has spent 8 months learning to know where someone is without needing to look directly at them. He found her at 9:50 near the harbor windows, in the quieter edge of the room where the light was lower and the noise from the main floor was softened to something manageable. He looked at her dress. "Green," he said. "Yes." "The other one was emerald." She looked at him. "You remembered the other one." "I remember most things about that night," he said. "In retrospect." He paused. "The exit route you recommended to security. The way you were standing near the entrance when I arrived. The fact that you had already been there for an hour." He held her gaze. "In retrospect, I was watching you and telling myself I wasn't." She absorbed that. "That was 8 months ago," she said. "Yes." "Before you knew the water, the elevator, any of it." "Before any of it," he said. "You contradicted my expectations. That was enough." She looked at the harbor. The water was still tonight, the lights on its surface unbroken, whole columns of yellow and white reflecting upward toward the sky. "The reporter found me earlier," she said. "I heard. What did you tell him?" "The change starts somewhere. That staying was my decision." She paused. "That the work was real." Si-hyuk was quiet for a moment. "It was," he said. "Is." "I know." He turned and looked at her directly, with the full version of the expression she had been watching develop for 8 months. Not the closed management, not the calculation, but the thing underneath all of it that she had first seen clearly in a hospital room at 7 in the morning when he had said her name for the first time. "The board meeting," he said. "Thursday. You asked 3 questions." "Yes." "The second one, the indemnity structure." "The lawyers defaulted to the wrong framework," she said. "It's a common error in "I know what it is," he said. "I want to tell you something about it." He paused, with the specific pause of a man constructing something he is not going to say incorrectly. "When you asked that question, there were 14 people in that room. 11 of them had not caught the issue. 2 had caught it and decided not to raise it. He stopped. 1 had caught it and was trying to decide whether raising it was worth the potential conflict." He looked at her. "You caught it, raised it, ran the discussion to conclusion, and moved the meeting forward. In 45 minutes of watching you work, 3 board members who had reservations about your appointment revised their position." She held his gaze. "You're describing competence." "I'm describing more than competence," he said. "I'm describing what it looks like when someone changes a room by being entirely themselves inside it." The gala noise continued around them. Music had started somewhere in the main space, a string arrangement of something she couldn't identify, low and present. She thought about a boardroom 8 months ago. 20 people who did not breathe. The particular quality of the silence that had followed his words, which she had lived inside ever since in various forms. She thought about what it had cost her. Not the professional cost, which was accounted for and managed, but the human one. The thing that happened in your body when someone reduced you to the surface of you and used it as a verdict. She thought about what it meant that she was standing at this window, in this dress, in this city, with this particular man looking at her with this particular expression. "You almost fired me on my first day," she said. Something moved across his face, not the smile, something older and more serious. "Yes," he said. "You said I brought trouble." "You did." He held her gaze. "You destroyed 20 years of lies that I had been living inside. You dismantled your way through my uncle's infrastructure without knowing that's what you were doing. You stopped 3 assassination attempts because you replaced a bottle and flagged an invoice and chased me down a hallway for a signature. You changed this company." He paused. "And you sat with me in a hospital room at 7 in the morning and told me the truth, when the truth was hard. And you didn't make it easier just because you could have." She looked at him. "That's a significant amount of trouble," he said, "for one secretary." "I'm not your secretary anymore," she said. "No," he said, "you're not." He reached into his jacket pocket. She saw what was in his hand before he had fully extended it, and she felt something happen in her chest that was not quite any of the things she normally felt. Not the professional composure, not the managed competence, not the particular collected steadiness she had been running on for 8 months. Something less organized than any of those things. Something that had been living very quietly in a specific location for a very specific amount of time and was now, without permission, becoming large. He looked at the ring in his hand, then at her. "I have terrible timing," he said. Her own words, from 20 minutes ago, returned without any modification. She felt the laugh before she heard it, a real one, unmanaged and immediate, the kind that belongs to the person who laughs and not to the performance of laughing. "Kwon Si-hyuk," she said. "Yes." "We are standing at a window at a company gala in front of—" She glanced briefly at the room behind him. "Approximately 200 people." "Yes." "Including 3 board members and at least 1 reporter with a recorder." "I'm aware." "This is exactly the dramatic location problem I mentioned." "I know." He did not move, did not put the ring away, did not look away from her. "But I've been thinking about it for 3 months, and the timing is never going to be right because I don't know how to wait for the right time when I know what I want." He paused. "That might be a character flaw." "It is," she said. "It's also—" She stopped. She thought about Toby, about her mother's voice, about Lagos and London, and a hospital bed at 7 in the morning, and a kitchen at 5 a.m., and a shipyard and a harbor, and a letter in a man's inside jacket pocket that he had carried by hand because it mattered too much to send electronically. She thought about what it meant to be chosen, not because you were convenient or useful or easily understood, but because someone had seen the whole complicated real version of you, the clumsy exterior and the extraordinary interior and everything in between, and had arrived at a decision. She thought about what it meant to choose back. She took 1 step toward him and caught the edge of her gown on the small platform lip at the base of the window, the one that was approximately 3 centimeters high and completely invisible in the evening lighting, and went off balance in the specific dramatic fashion of a person for whom this kind of thing was simply a recurring feature of existing. Si-hyuk caught her hand. She steadied. She looked down at his hand around hers and then up at his face, which was doing the full smile, the complete, unguarded, real version. And behind him, she was very aware that 200 people had just witnessed whatever had happened in the last 30 seconds. From somewhere in the room, someone started to clap. Someone else laughed. The applause spread in the particular way applause spreads when a room has been watching something without knowing it was watching something and has now decided it is fully committed. Zuri looked at the room, then at Si-hyuk, who was still holding her hand and was still smiling and was, she realized, still on one knee. He had gone down when he caught her, an automatic movement, and was now technically in the classic position entirely by accident, which was possibly the most accurate representation of the past 8 months she could have staged deliberately. "That wasn't on purpose," she said. "I know," he said. "This is going to be in that reporter's article."
Probably, he said. She looked at him, at the ring still in his other hand, at the 200 people behind him who had gone very quiet in the particular way of a room that is holding its breath for a reason. She thought about the version of herself who had stood in a boardroom 8 months ago with a folder pressed against her chest, and a city she didn't know outside the windows, and the understanding, somewhere below professional composure, that she was going to need everything she had. She had used everything she had. She had found, on the other side of using it, that she had more. Yes, she said. The room erupted. Well, the months after were not a film's soft-focus version of after. They were actual months, with actual complications. The legal proceedings against Tae-moon moving through their slow institutional process, the organizational restructuring hitting friction points. She and Si-hyuk worked through one by one, the subcommittee on the International Partnership Framework running 2 months over schedule because the lawyers kept defaulting to the wrong indemnity structure, and she kept correcting them back. She called Toby every Sunday. His voice got stronger every month. The follow-up appointments moved from weekly to monthly to quarterly, each one returning results that moved in the direction results needed to move. Her mother's voice on those calls changed too. The particular tension that had lived in it for 18 months gradually releasing, the laugh returning more often, the stories about the neighborhood and the family and the ordinary accumulations of a life being lived rather than survived. "Are you happy?" Toby asked again, 4 months after the gala. "Yes," she said, this time without the qualifier. "Good," he said. "You sound it." "You sound stronger," she said. "The doctor says—" "I know what the doctor says. I read the report." "Zuri." "Toby." A pause. She heard him smiling through the phone, which was a thing she had learned to hear over years of Sunday calls. "When are you coming home?" he said. "April," she said. "Si-hyuk is coming with me." The silence on his end was brief and expressive. "He's coming to Lagos?" Toby said. "Yes." "To meet Mama?" "Yes." Another silence. Then, with the specific energy of a 17-year-old who has opinions and is going to express them, "I have a lot of questions for him." "I know," she said. "I've warned him." "Did you warn him about Mama's questions?" She paused. "I warned him that Mama has questions. I may have underrepresented the scope." Toby laughed. A full one, healthy and real, the laugh of a person who has come back from something and has rediscovered that coming back was worth it. She held the phone and listened to it. Oh, in Abuja, 3 months after the gala, in a house with a ceiling fan turning slowly overhead and afternoon light coming through shuttered windows, Adeniyi Obafemi poured tea. He was 71 years old, with the steady hands of a man who had survived what he had survived without losing the ability to be careful with things. His daughter had offered to be present. He had declined, politely, and with the explanation that some conversations needed the space that only a smaller room allows. He poured 3 cups, set them on the table between himself and Kwon Si-hyuk, with Zuri in the chair against the wall slightly behind Si-hyuk's shoulder. Present, available, quiet, in the way she had learned to be quiet in rooms that needed a specific quality of witness. Si-hyuk spoke for a long time. She had heard most of it before, in its pieces. In a hospital room, in an apartment at 2 in the morning, in the cold outside a warehouse, in quiet conversations that had accumulated over 8 months into something that resembled, finally, the complete picture. But she had not heard it assembled like this, in sequence, directed at a man who had been absent from the story for 22 years and was now present for its accounting. Si-hyuk did not make it easy on himself. He said what had been done with precision. He said the name of the man who had done it. He said what had been built on top of it, and how long it had stood, and how many people had lived inside the structure without knowing what was underneath. He said what it had cost the man in front of him, as completely as he could account for a cost he had not witnessed and could only imagine. He said he could not undo it. Obafemi listened. The ceiling fan turned. The tea cooled in the cups. Through the shuttered windows, Abuja's afternoon sounds moved in and out. Traffic, voices, the particular urban texture of a city conducting its ordinary business. When Si-hyuk finished, Obafemi was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands. He looked at the table. He looked at Si-hyuk. "Your father," he said, in the English that had the Lagos inflection underneath the British education,
used to say that the value of a partnership was not in what it produced, but in what it required. That two people who could build something together had to trust each other enough to be vulnerable to each other. He paused. I thought it was idealism. I was wrong. It was the most practical thing he ever said. Si-hyuk looked at him. He was not a naive man, Obafemi said. He was a trusting one. That's different. Naive means you don't see the risk. Trusting means you see it and decide the relationship is worth it. He looked at his cup. He saw it. He decided I was worth it. He was quiet for a moment. I've spent 22 years wondering if I was. He was right, Si-hyuk said. His voice was completely level, which was the most it could be, the best the management could do with what was moving underneath it. Everything I've found, every record, every account, he was right about you. Obafemi nodded, once, slowly. The partnership, Si-hyuk said, what my father envisioned, the international markets, West Africa, the framework he was building with you before. He stopped, started again. I want to rebuild it, not because it undoes anything, because it was the right vision and it was never given its chance. He held Obafemi's gaze. I'm asking if you would be willing to be involved, in whatever form makes sense, whatever form feels right to you. Obafemi was quiet for a long time. He looked at Zuri. You found the records, he said. Yes, she said. How? A transfer that didn't match. An invoice with a gap. She paused. I can't leave things that don't fit where they're supposed to fit. He studied her for a moment. Then, you're Nigerian. Lagos, she said. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood. Your father was a businessman? He was, she said. He died when I was 12. Obafemi nodded slowly, the nod of a person who has lost people and recognizes the shape of that loss in others without needing it to be explained. He would have liked this, he said, gesturing at the table between them, at whatever this conversation was. The two of you. This. He looked at Si-hyuk. Your father would have liked this too. Si-hyuk did not speak. Yes, Zuri said, for both of them. I think he would have. On the flight back, somewhere over the ocean, with the cabin dark and the engine's low constant hum, Si-hyuk reached into his jacket pocket and took out a photograph. She had seen it once before, in his apartment, the night before the shipyard. She had not looked at it long that time. He held it so she could see it clearly in the faint cabin light. His parents, young, at a harbor. His mother was laughing at something outside the frame. His father was looking at her with an expression that Zuri recognized because she had learned in 8 months to recognize it. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at Si-hyuk. He looked back. He put the photograph away carefully, in the same inside pocket. She turned toward the window. The sky was dark and the clouds were below them. And above the clouds there were stars, distant and indifferent and constant. The way the harbor was constant. The way some things persist regardless of what is done in the spaces beneath them. She thought about her father, who had died when she was 12, and who she had spent 15 years carrying in the specific way you carry someone you didn't get enough time with, carefully, in the places where they fit, without letting the weight of them slow you down. She thought about Toby's voice, strong now, regular, itself again. She thought about a boardroom with rain on the windows and 20 people who did not breathe, and the particular moment when her chin had gone up and she had said, if my skin is unacceptable, then the problem belongs to you. She had not known, standing there, that she was beginning something. She had only known she was not ending herself. That was enough. That had always been enough. Si-hyuk's hand was on the armrest between them, open, not quite reaching for her, in the way of a man who has learned to offer without demanding. She put her hand in his. He closed his fingers around it. The plane flew on through the dark, carrying them east toward a harbor city full of rain and glass, and a table on the 48th floor where a nameplate read Director Adebayo, and the files were organized and the windows looked out at the water, and everything that had been wrong for 22 years was in the slow, imperfect, irreversible process of becoming something else. Not clean, not finished, not the soft focus version where everything heals without leaving marks, but moving. Forward. Together. And for the first time in a very long time, Zuri Adebayo closed her eyes on a plane and slept without negotiating for it, without the management, without the weight of everything she was carrying pressing down on the surface of the dark. She slept because she was tired and because she was safe, and because the work, for now, was done. The ocean moved below them, vast and indifferent, as it always had. And somewhere in Abuja, an old man sat at a table with 3 cold cups of tea and thought about a conversation that had taken 22 years to arrive, and found that it had been worth